Before we get started, my name's Raphael, and I created this channel to share science fiction stories, the kind that stick with you, even after they end. Everything here is made up, but full of emotion, tough choices, and moments that make you think. So, I'll ask just one small favor. If this kind of story speaks to you, hit that subscribe button. I'm working hard to reach my first 0 subscribers, and your vote of confidence really means a lot. And if you've got a second, drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from. I love knowing who's out there on the other side. Now take a deep breath. The story's about to begin.
They say love in the slums is just another way to get stabbed. I should know. I've been stabbed plenty. But the knife I carry now, the one twisting my gut every time I look at her, that one's silent. And it's fatal. It's fatal because she is Anya, and I am Kael. She is the Xylosian queen of the Maya, the one thing holding the lower sectors of Tyrus VII together, and I am just the human kid she found scavenging fusion scraps 4 years ago. 17 years old, stranded and completely impossibly, in love with a revolutionary alien leader who sees me as nothing more than a highly efficient tool. The K'tharr call us vermin. They are the Dragon Tyrants, huge, armored reptiles who glide their dreadnoughts through the upper atmosphere, demanding tithes of biofuel, resources, and sometimes young bodies. They rule by overwhelming force and the simple, terrifying fact that they are physically immune to 90% of our weaponry. They are gods in this ruined city, and we are the dirt beneath their claws. Anya is the only one who has ever made that dirt fight back. Our headquarters was a network of ancient decommissioned water purification tunnels, smelling perpetually of ozone, rust, and the sharp, dry scent of Xylosian pheromones. We were in the main briefing chamber, a space barely large enough for the 6 of us, illuminated by flickering emergency lamps. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind of metallic tension you could taste. "The transport is due to dock at OS 300 Local E," Anya said, her voice a low, resonant rumble that somehow always cut through the noise. She was tracing lines on the damp, cracked wall with a laser pointer. Anya was magnificent. She stood nearly 2 meters tall, lean and powerful, covered in chitinous plates that shifted colors subtly from deep obsidian to electric blue when she moved. Her eyes were multifaceted, like polished amethyst, giving her an unnerving 360-degree view of the room, though somehow, when she looked at me, I felt seen, truly seen, for the first time since my parents dumped me here at 13. "The manifest?" she asked, not looking at me, but knowing I had the data. I stepped forward, projecting the stolen K'tharr logistics data onto the wall beside her. My job is strategy, infiltration, and information warfare. The K'tharr are powerful, yes, but they rely on brute strength and bureaucratic rigidity. They assume nobody can break their codes. They forget that humans, when desperate, are experts at pattern recognition and exploiting loopholes. "It's a major supply run, Anya," I said, my voice steady, trained to betray nothing. "Medical supplies, field rations, and critically 12 cylinders of refined deuterium-7 fuel, enough to power the lower sector shields for a full cycle." A low murmur went through the assembled fighters, all Xylosian, hardened veterans who had lost families, limbs, or hope to the K'tharr. They respected me only because Anya did, and because my plans rarely failed. They called me the Ghost because I could move through K'tharr systems without leaving a trace. 12 cylinders, repeated Varrock, Anya's second-in-command, a massive warrior whose face was scarred by plasma burns. That depot is guarded by a heavy Vex-class patrol, standard operating procedure, 2 armored flyers and 6 ground patrols. "Standard procedure is the weakness," I countered, pointing to a specific junction on the projected map. I used my hand to physically brush aside the holographic representation of the heavy armor. "The K'tharr believe in overwhelming presence. They patrol on a strict 14-minute cycle. They also believe the only way to breach the depot is through the main access tunnel, which is heavily monitored. I tapped the projection again, highlighting a section of old unstable sub-level piping. 4 years ago, before the K'tharr took this city, that section was a sewage line. It's now decommissioned, structurally unsound, and ignored by their thermal scanners because it's constantly fluctuating in temperature. Varrock grunted, skeptical. It's a crawl space, Kael. We are not mice. No, I agreed, meeting his gaze evenly. But we are fast, and we are quiet. The K'tharr rely on their sensors picking up large heat signatures and standard comms chatter. We go silent. We enter that pipe at 2:55. We only have 5 minutes inside before the Vex-class flyers rotate back over the sector. I looked at Anya, waiting for her approval. This was the moment of truth. She always let me lay out the entire plan before she gave her final word. It was a test, every time, to ensure my strategy held up under the pressure of her scrutiny. Her eyes, those ancient, beautiful amethyst eyes, tracked the line I had drawn. I felt the familiar, dizzying rush of proximity. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear of the K'tharr, but from the simple, devastating fact that I was standing close enough to smell the dry spice and ozone clinging to her. She shifted her weight, and her hand. 3 long, elegant fingers tipped with razor-sharp claws brushed mine as she adjusted the hollow emitter. It wasn't intentional, but the shock ran up my arm like a discharge cable. I quickly pulled my hand away, hoping the dim light hid the flush on my face. Idiot, I chided myself silently. Focus. She is your leader. She is your purpose. She is not yours. The risk is manageable, Anya finally declared, her voice firm. But 5 minutes is a razor's edge. Kael, you will lead the infiltration team. Varrock, you will handle the extraction team and the perimeter breach charges. My stomach tightened. Lead the infiltration. Anya, you need me here, monitoring the K'tharr comms for deviation. No, she interrupted, her gaze finally locking onto mine. The intensity was enough to make my knees weak. I need you where the plan is executed. If the K'tharr deviate, I need you to improvise. Your mind adapts faster than any of my warriors, Kael. You are the only one who can pull back from a failed entry point and find the next one instantly. It was the highest compliment she could give, a validation of the years I had spent learning their language, their tactics, and their arrogance. It was the reason I stayed. Understood, I managed, gripping the edge of the console to steady myself. The objective is the deuterium, Anya continued, addressing the room. The Maya is starving, and winter is coming. If the K'tharr find out how weak our shield generators are, they will burn this sector to ash. We get the fuel, or we die trying. There is no retreat. She dismissed the others, who moved quickly to gather their specialized gear. Silent kinetic rifles, grappling hooks, and thermal shielding blankets. Soon, it was just the 2 of us in the echoing chamber. The silence stretched, heavy and meaningful. I started organizing the final equipment check, avoiding her gaze. I knew what was coming, the pre-mission conversation, the one where she reminded me of the stakes, not just for the Maya, but for me. Kael. I stopped bundling the climbing ropes. Yes, Anya. The K'tharr have been tracking human signatures more aggressively lately. I knew why. They had realized that the sudden, sharp upturn in resistance tactics wasn't coming from the Xylosians, who they had fought for generations. It was coming from the anomaly, the small, adaptable, calculating human. I'm careful, I said. Careful isn't enough when you're facing a Vex-class patrol, Kael. She stepped closer, and I had to fight the urge to instinctively back away. She smelled closer now, the ozone sharp and clean. If you are captured, they will not execute you. They will study you. They will find out how you break their codes. I met her eyes. I know the protocols. If I am compromised, I trigger the neural disruptor. The neural disruptor was a small implanted chip behind my ear, designed to wipe my memory banks and fry the central nervous system instantly. A clean end, guaranteeing I couldn't betray her or the Maya, even under K'tharr interrogation. "It is not just about the data, Kael," she said, her voice softening just slightly, a rare and devastating occurrence. She reached out, and her clawed finger gently touched the patch of skin just above the implant. It was a touch of pure, agonizing tenderness. "It is about the cost. You are valuable, more valuable than 12 fuel cylinders." I couldn't breathe. This was the closest she ever came to admitting she cared about my survival beyond my utility. "I will not fail you," I whispered, my voice thick. "I know you won't fail me," she countered, her gaze unwavering. "That is the problem. You will succeed, even if it costs you everything. You shouldn't have to carry this burden, Kael. You are so young." I managed a wry smile. "I stopped being young the day my parents left me here, Anya. You gave me a reason to live, a way to fight back. You gave me a purpose that is worth any cost." She withdrew her hand slowly, the moment broken. The cold reality of the bunker rushed back in. She was the leader. I was the soldier. "Go, and be the ghost they fear you are." I nodded, strapping the comms unit onto my wrist. I turned and walked toward the staging area, my mind already calculating distances, thermal fluctuations, and the necessary angle for the pipe entry. But even as I focused on the mission, the memory of her touch burned on my skin. I knew my love for her was impossible. I was a human. She was a Xylosian elder. She was burdened by the survival of thousands. I was just a boy with a knack for breaking codes. But that impossibility didn't make the feeling any less real, or any less dangerous. It drove me, fueled me, making me reckless and brilliant in equal measure. I didn't fight the K'tharr for the Maya, not really. I fought them for her. Varrock and the other 5 fighters were waiting, clad in matte black stealth armor. We were silent, moving with the practiced efficiency of those who understand that noise equals death. "Status check," I mouthed to Varrock. "Charged and ready," he replied, his voice a low hiss over the closed comms loop. We moved out of the tunnels and into the open air of the lower sectors. The Maya was a landscape of broken neon signs, rusting ferroconcrete, and perpetual drizzle. Above us, the massive, imposing structure of the K'tharr depot loomed, a fortress of black chromium and shielded energy fields, a tumor on the ruined city. The air smelled of industrial decay and the faint metallic scent of the K'tharr's atmospheric pollution. We reached the access point, a broken maintenance hatch leading down to the forgotten sewage pipe. The opening was barely wide enough for Varrock's armored frame. I checked my internal clock, 0248. 7 minutes until entry. I activated the thermal cloaking on my suit, the air around me shimmering slightly as my heat signature dropped dramatically. Varrock and the others followed suit. "Remember the sequence?" I whispered into the comms. "Silent entry. No kinetic fire unless we are compromised. If you see a K'tharr, you move around it. We are ghosts." Varrock nodded, his massive form already slipping into the rusted pipe opening. I was the last one in. I slid down the slick, narrow shaft, the metallic scraping of my armor muffled by the specialized coating. The pipe was dark, claustrophobic, and filled with a thick, acrid moisture. I moved on my hands and knees, the sound of my own breathing echoing deafeningly in my ears. We crawled for what felt like an eternity, though it was only 4 minutes. Every muscle in my body screamed with the effort, but my focus was absolute. I was the clock, the map, and the contingency plan. 0254, 1 minute to entry time. We reached the end of the pipe, which opened into a shallow, rarely used sub-level utility closet inside the K'tharr depot. I peered through the crack, using my visual enhancer. Empty, good. I signaled Varrock. He used a small, silent cutter to widen the opening just enough for us to squeeze through. We spilled out into the closet, immediately pressing ourselves against the cold metal wall. Zhou 255. We were inside the belly of the beast. The depot was vast, humming with the deep thrum of heavy machinery and the distant echoing clang of K'tharr patrols. I brought up the internal schematics. The storage bay for the Deuterium VII was 300 meters north, across the main maintenance corridor. Corridor is clear for 30 seconds, I transmitted softly. Go, silent run. Varrock, flank right. I'm taking the lead. I moved first, a shadow against shadows. My human frame, small and agile compared to the massive Xylosians, was an advantage here. I hugged the shadows, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. We crossed the corridor, slipping into a secondary maintenance tunnel, just as the heavy, rhythmic steps of a K'tharr patrol echoed past the junction. We made it to the storage bay door. It was locked with a triple redundancy biometric seal. Child's play. I pulled out my customized interface spike, a piece of old human tech modified with Xylosian crystal processors. I jammed it into the access panel. The spike began to blink rapidly, cycling through K'tharr encryption keys. 0258, 2 minutes left. The Vex-class flyers would be rotating back over the depot exterior any second. If they detected any unusual power drain or comm spike, they would flood the building with troops. The lock clicked open, silently. I pushed the heavy door inward. The storage bay was massive, lit by harsh white lights. The 12 Deuterium VII cylinders sat stacked on a transport pallet in the center of the room, shining with a dangerous, tempting glow. Varrock, secure the fuel. We have 90 seconds, I instructed. The Xylosians moved with practiced speed, attaching magnetic grapples to the cylinders and preparing to lift them onto the prepared transport sleds. Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered. A low, guttural voice echoed from the corridor outside. Intruder alert. Biosignature detected. Non-K'tharr species. My blood ran cold. Impossible. We were thermally shielded. Comms silent. I rushed back to the door, peering out. A K'tharr officer, larger and more heavily armored than a standard grunt, stood in the corridor, its massive head tilted, sniffing the air. It wasn't relying on sensors. It was relying on scent. The K'tharr, I realized with a sickening lurch, had adapted. They knew we were using thermal cloaking, and they were now using enhanced olfactory sensors. "We're compromised," I hissed into the comms. "Abort the extraction. We have to fight our way out." "Negative, Kael." Varrock's voice was strained. "We have 8 cylinders secured. We cannot leave the rest." "You leave them or you die!" The K'tharr officer let out a terrifying, high-pitched screech, a localized alarm signal. I knew what I had to do. The plan was dead. Now it was improvisation. And if I was going to buy Varrock the time he needed, I had to draw the fire. I looked at the fuel cylinders, then back at the officer. I needed a diversion, something big and loud, something that would panic the K'tharr into abandoning their patrol patterns. I saw it, a small, unmarked console attached to the wall, right next to the deuterium. It was the ventilation controls for the bay. I sprinted toward it, ignoring Varrock's sharp, questioning noise. "Varrock, get the cylinders moving. I'll create the window." I slammed my interface spike into the ventilation console, overriding the security lock. The K'tharr officer was already charging the storage bay door. The spike screamed as it fought the encryption. I didn't have time for a clean hack. I went for the brute force option, a system overload. I bypassed the safety protocols and rerouted the entire bay's power supply through the ventilation fans. The console sparked violently, spitting fire into the air. The K'tharr officer burst through the doorway, its massive plasma rifle already aiming at Varrock. "Human!" the officer roared, recognizing my small, exposed form. I didn't hesitate. I slammed my fist onto the execute command. The ventilation fans, designed to handle atmospheric circulation, suddenly spun up to impossible speeds, drawing pure, unfiltered city air, polluted with volatile chemicals and fine dust, into the sealed bay. The resulting pressure differential was catastrophic. With a deafening boom, every window and secondary seal in the bay blew outward. More importantly, the massive influx of air destabilized the delicate shielding around the stored fuel. The alarm system, which had been tracking biosignatures, suddenly went haywire, prioritizing the massive environmental breach. I had bought them 5 seconds of pure chaos. "Go!" I screamed at Varrock, grabbing a loose plasma pistol from the ground. Varrock, understanding the sacrifice, grabbed the sleds and dragged the 8 cylinders out into the corridor. I fired the plasma pistol not at the officer, but at the remaining 4 deuterium cylinders. The K'tharr officer hesitated for just a moment, recognizing the suicidal danger of igniting the fuel. That was my window. I dove through the blown-out ventilation shaft, scrambling back into the suffocating dark pipe. "Kael, report!" Varrock's voice was frantic in the comms. "I'm in the pipe. The bay is destabilized. Get clear of the depot." Now, behind me, I heard the officer's frustrated roar, followed by the heavy thud of its armor trying to squeeze into the pipe. It wouldn't fit. Not quickly enough. I scrambled forward, fueled by adrenaline and the terrifying knowledge that I had just given up 4 vital fuel cylinders. Anya would not be happy, but we had 8. We burst out of the maintenance hatch and into the open air. The K'tharr depot was already swarming with armored patrols, drawn by the catastrophic environmental alert. We were running on borrowed time. We ran through the twisting alleys of the mire, Varrock and the others dragging the heavy fuel sleds. The K'tharr would be on us within minutes. They had the speed, the flyers, and the overwhelming firepower. As we reached the edge of the safe zone, a dense, electromagnetically shielded district, I felt a searing pain rip through my left shoulder, a plasma bolt. It had glanced off my shoulder plate, but the force sent me sprawling into the wet concrete. I gasped, tasting blood. I tried to push myself up, but my left arm was useless, the armor melted and fusing to my skin. "Kael!" Varrock stopped, turning to come back for me. "No, keep moving!" "Get the fuel to the tunnels," I yelled, pulling my functional right arm free and crawling toward the nearest shadow. Varrock hesitated, torn between his duty to the fuel and his loyalty to me. Then a shadow descended from the sky, a K'tharr flyer, low and fast, scanning the streets. Varrock made the only choice he could. He pulled the sleds into the shielded zone, disappearing into the darkness. I was alone, exposed. The flyer's searchlight swept the alley. I pressed myself against the broken wall, willing my heat signature to remain suppressed. The light passed over me once, twice. It moved on, focusing on the large, retreating Xylosian signatures. They were looking for the big targets. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I was safe for now, but injured and stranded deep in K'tharr territory. I pushed myself up, biting back a scream of pain. I started walking, using the debris as cover, heading back toward the tunnels. I had sacrificed 4 cylinders, but I had saved the team and secured the majority of the objective. It was a victory, but a costly one. As I stumbled through the darkness, the pain in my shoulder was a dull roar, but it was nothing compared to the cold dread that settled in my heart. The K'tharr had adapted. They were learning, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was just the beginning of the real war. A war I was fighting for a woman who would never look at me the way I looked at her. I reached the tunnel entrance, collapsing through the hatch. My mission was complete. Now, I just had to face Anya and pray that the cost of the 4 lost cylinders wasn't too high. I closed my eyes, the tunnel air thick and suffocating. Humanity, fuck yeah, I thought bitterly. We win by bleeding, by calculating the exact price of our own survival. And the price tonight felt heavy indeed. The air in the tunnel was a heavy, suffocating blanket of rust and damp earth. I collapsed onto the cold floor, the hatch slamming shut above me. My lungs burned, and the pain in my left shoulder was blinding, a wet, searing agony that made the world swim. Varrock was instantly there, his massive Xylosian form blocking the weak emergency light. He didn't speak, just issued a low, concerned trill, a sound usually reserved for morning. "The fuel," I managed, my voice a raw whisper. 8 cylinders. Did you secure them?" "Secured. Kael," Varrock confirmed, his voice rough with exertion and relief. He was already tearing away the melted plating on my shoulder. "But you are damaged. That blast was too close." I gritted my teeth as he applied a crude, pressurized sealant patch to the wound. The plasma bolt hadn't hit bone, but it had vaporized the surrounding tissue. It felt like someone had driven a white-hot spike through me. "It's fine," I lied, trying to focus on the numbers, not the searing heat. "We lost 4. I had to create the breach." Varrock paused, his multifaceted eyes fixed on my face. "You sacrificed the objective for the team. That is the Xylosian way, Kael. We will explain to Anya." I closed my eyes. "No, I will explain to Anya." The walk back to the main briefing chamber was a blur of staggered steps and muffled pain. I refused the stretcher. I needed to walk in under my own power, to present the intelligence before the injury. In the mire, weakness is a luxury we couldn't afford, especially not in front of the leader. When I entered the chamber, the atmosphere was a toxic mix of relief and anxiety. The 8 deuterium cylinders were already stacked neatly in the corner, radiating a soft, precious blue glow. They were the difference between a cold, dark winter and survival. Anya was standing over the cylinders, her hand resting lightly on the metal casing. She didn't turn around immediately. She knew I was there. She knew I was injured. The room cleared quickly. Varrock gave me a subtle nod of encouragement and left. It was just us again, the silence thicker and more charged than any plasma weapon. 8 cylinders, she finally said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. It was worse than anger. We needed 12. Kael. The engineers calculated the minimum required to sustain the shield generators through the coldest cycle. I stood straighter, ignoring the throbbing agony in my shoulder. The K'tharr adapted, Anya. They were running olfactory sensors, not just thermal. The officer smelled us. She turned then, her eyes sweeping over me, taking in the blood-soaked patch on my shoulder, the exhaustion etched on my face. But her focus remained laser-sharp on the tactical failure. "Explain the adaptation," she demanded. I projected the data I'd managed to gather in the split second before the explosion, a flicker of an enhanced sensor array on the K'tharr officer's helmet. They realized the Xylosians and humans were using thermal suppression. They switched to tracking pheromones and bioeffluvium. We smelled like foreign objects in their clean environment. The officer was tracking us by scent, not heat. Anya stepped closer to the projection, her long fingers tracing the outline of the sensor. The obsidian plates of her armor seemed to darken with concentration. "They learn quickly," she murmured. "This changes everything. Our entire infiltration doctrine is compromised." "Precisely," I said. "I had 5 seconds before that officer opened fire on Varrock and the fuel. If I hadn't overloaded the ventilation, we would have lost everything and the entire team." The environmental alert panicked them. It bought Varrock the time to extract the 8. She looked up, meeting my gaze. Her amethyst eyes held a terrifying depth of calculation. 4 cylinders lost, she repeated, the cost weighing heavily in the air. But the intel gained is invaluable. If we had continued under the old assumption, the next raid would have been a massacre. She didn't thank me. She didn't scold me for the loss. She simply processed the exchange. 4 cylinders for a tactical advantage. In her world, that was a fair trade. "Sit down, Kael," she ordered. her tone shifting slightly. "The wound needs proper dressing. Varroc's sealant is temporary." I hesitated, then obeyed, sinking onto the edge of the console. She moved toward the medical kit, her movements fluid and economical. "You pushed the window too far," she said, retrieving a surgical laser and antiseptic gel. 5 minutes was already a razor's edge. "You stayed to ensure the extraction." "I stayed because I am the only one small enough to fit back into that damn pipe quickly," I retorted, trying to inject some bravado into my voice. She didn't argue. She simply began cleaning the wound. The laser cauterized the edges with a sharp hiss, and the smell of burnt flesh filled the air. I clenched my jaw, refusing to make a sound. "The K'tharr are not just adapting to our movements," Anya said, her voice low, focused on her work. "They are adapting to you, Kael. They are starting to recognize the pattern of human ingenuity, the exploiting of bureaucracy, the rapid improvisation. They know this level of strategy does not come from the Xylosians." "Let them think that," I whispered. "It makes them predictable. They will focus their countermeasures on the small, fast threat. They will try to find the ghost." Her hand, gentle yet firm, held my head steady as she stitched the deeper layers of muscle. The proximity was overwhelming. I could feel the heat radiating off her chitin, smell the dry spice of her natural pheromones. It was a dizzying mix of pain and longing. "If they capture you, Kael," she said, her voice dropping to that devastating, soft register, "they will not rest until they understand how your mind works. That is why the neural disruptor exists. You know that." "I know," I confirmed, meeting her eyes, "and I will use it." She finished the stitches, applying a regenerative paste that immediately began to cool the burn. She stepped back, and the sudden distance was a physical ache. 8 cylinders means we can run the shields at 70% capacity for the full winter cycle," she stated, back to the commander. "But 70% is a risk. A sustained orbital bombardment will breach the lower sector defenses within 48 hours. We need to buy time." "They won't use orbital bombardment yet," I countered, standing up carefully. The paste was already dulling the pain. "They still need Tyrus VII intact for the biofuel tithes. They rule through calculated oppression, not scorched earth. They want us alive and suffering, not dead and useless." "So, how do we buy time, Kael? We cannot raid again." "Not with their new sensors." I walked over to the holographic display, bringing up the map of the K'tharr Central Command, the massive spire that pierced the smog layer above the city. "We don't raid the supply lines, Anya. We attack their arrogance." Varroc and 2 other veterans re-entered the room, sensing the strategic shift. They watched me, waiting. "The K'tharr rely on 2 things, overwhelming force and absolute control of information," I continued, pointing to a section of the spire designated as the K'tharr Planetary Governance Data Core. "They believe their encryption is unbreakable. They believe their systems are isolated from the Maya." "You are suggesting a full infiltration of the spire?" Varroc sounded incredulous. "That is suicide, Kael. It is guarded by 3 regiments of heavy armor." "No, not a full infiltration," I said, shaking my head. "We can't fight them on that scale, but remember their weakness, their bureaucracy. They log everything, every tithe, every patrol, every personnel file, and they trust their systems implicitly." I looked at Anya. "We need to make them think they are compromised when they are not. We need to introduce a ghost into their machine that they can't track by scent, heat, or comms. We need to create a threat so existential to their control structure that they pull back their patrols from the mire to defend their data." Anya's eyes narrowed, a flicker of comprehension lighting them up. "A virtual attack, using their own architecture against them." "Exactly," I confirmed. "They have been tracking human signatures. They know I exist. We give them a target. A massive phantom data breach that screams, 'Humanity is here, and we are inside your firewall.' They will prioritize saving their data over policing the mire." And how do you propose to introduce a phantom breach into the highest security data core on the planet? Varrock demanded. I allowed myself a small, painful smile. I need a distraction, a highly visible, highly volatile distraction at the Spire's primary ground-level entrance. Something that forces the K'tharr to deploy their new olfactory sensors and realize they are useless against the real threat. I tapped the projection, highlighting the Spire's main loading dock. We use the 4 lost deuterium cylinders. A gasp went through the room. Anya stared at me, her expression unreadable. You are suggesting we turn 4 cylinders of critical fuel into a bomb? A very visible, very frightening bomb, I clarified. We didn't lose the fuel, Anya. We left it behind to be recovered. They will analyze the scene, see the 4 remaining cylinders, and transport them back to the depot for analysis and storage. And then we plant a timed directional charge on one of the transport vehicles leaving the depot for the Spire. We detonate it at the moment of peak K'tharr shift change at the Spire loading dock. It won't breach the Spire's defenses, but the resulting fusion flare will be visible across the upper sectors. It will look like a direct attack on their command structure. I leaned in, my voice dropping to emphasize the next point. While they are dealing with the physical explosion, an explosion that generates a massive thermal signature, I will already be inside their network, planting the phantom data breach. They will track the thermal blast, the physical damage, and they will completely miss the digital ghost slipping through their firewalls. The room was silent. This wasn't a raid for resources. This was psychological warfare. Leveraging the K'tharr's reliance on brute force against them, it was pure human strategy. Anya looked at the map, then at me. The risk is catastrophic. If the K'tharr trace the remote detonation signature back to us, they will level the mire. They won't trace it back, I promised. I'll use a disposable, heavily shielded comms unit, fired from a long-range kinetic launcher. They'll be looking for a thermal signature. I'll give them a digital whisper. She nodded slowly. The decision was made. The cost was acceptable. Varrock, prepare a team for the kinetic launcher deployment. Kael, you are too injured for the field. You will remain here and coordinate the digital breach. Anya, I need to be closer to the source to guarantee the signal integrity, I argued instantly. No, she stated, her voice brooking no dissent. Your value is now too high. You will coordinate from the central hub. We will boost the signal. We cannot risk losing the brain that calculated this plan. It was the ultimate recognition of my value, but it felt like a cage. I was the weapon that couldn't be deployed. The meeting dispersed, the fighters moving with renewed purpose, energized by the audacity of the plan. I stayed at the console, running simulations, calculating the exact millisecond required for the digital insertion to coincide with the physical blast. My shoulder throbbed relentlessly, a constant reminder of the cost of the last victory. Hours later, the bunker was quiet again. I was alone, hunched over the glowing schematics, running code. Anya returned. She wasn't wearing her armor this time, just a simple, dark utility tunic, common among the Xylosian low caste. She looked less like a warrior queen and more like a weary survivor. She brought me a ration bar and a glass of lukewarm water. You haven't slept, she observed, setting the items down. The K'tharr aren't sleeping either, I replied, taking a grateful bite of the synthetic protein. She leaned against the console, watching me, the light from the hollow display reflected in her eyes, making them look like shifting galaxies. "Why do you do this, Kael?" she asked, the question seeming to come from a deep, tired place. "You are the only human left in the mire. You could have left 4 years ago. You could have scavenged enough credits to buy passage off-world." I stopped chewing. I knew the answer, but articulating it felt like ripping a nerve ending out of my chest. "I told you, Anya. You gave me purpose. Purpose is a cruel mistress, she countered softly. I know its weight. It demands everything. I watch you, Kael. You fight like you have nothing to lose, but you plan like you have everything to protect. I do, I admitted, looking down at my hands, stained with antiseptic and grime. I protect the Maya. I protect the people here. And me? The question hung in the air, impossibly heavy. It was the first time she had ever asked it so plainly. I met her gaze, letting the raw, impossible truth show for a fleeting second. You are the structure holding the purpose together, Anya. If you fall, the Maya falls. I won't let that happen. It was the truth, but it was also a shield. I couldn't tell her that every calculated risk, every sleepless night, every surge of adrenaline was powered by the desperate hope that she would see me, not just as a tool, but as a man. She sighed, a sound like dry leaves rustling. She reached out, not to touch my wound, but to gently brush the hair off my forehead. You are so young, Kael. You see the world in clean lines of purpose and loyalty. I see the cost. Her voice was heavy with regret. When this is over, if we survive this winter, you must leave Tyrus VII. You must live a life that doesn't require you to constantly calculate your own sacrifice. My heart twisted. She was planning my exit. She saw my devotion, and her response was to push me away, to save me from the inevitable heartbreak and danger of staying by her side. I can't leave you, I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. She pulled her hand back, her professional mask snapping instantly back into place. You will follow orders, Kael. That is what you do. Now focus on the code. We have 48 hours until the K'tharr transport is scheduled to move the remaining fuel to the Spire depot. She gave me a curt nod and left, the silence she left behind more agonizing than the plasma burn. I stared at the schematics. She saw a soldier. I saw an impossible future I was willing to die for. I focused on the core task, creating the Phantom Breach. The K'tharr data core was a labyrinth of military-grade encryption. I couldn't actually steal data. The bandwidth was too high, the risk of detection too great. I needed to make them think I had stolen something critical. I started building the Ghost. It wasn't code. It was a highly complex, self-replicating algorithm designed to mimic a massive data siphon. It would appear as if gigabytes of sensitive K'tharr defense schematics and personnel files were being extracted, but in reality, it would just be cycling garbage data through a massive, encrypted loop, creating a digital panic attack. I worked without rest, fueled by synthetic caffeine and the burning image of Anya's face. 40 hours later, the plan was ready. Varroc's team was positioned 3 kilometers away from the Spire, kinetic launcher, armed with the remote detonation unit. I was in the main briefing chamber, interface spike in hand, connected to the Maya's massive, old signal booster, an illegal piece of tech we had hidden deep beneath the tunnels. Varroc, status report, I transmitted, my voice low and steady despite the tremor in my hands. Target transport is moving into the loading dock now, Kael. 4 cylinders secured. K'tharr patrols, a standard density. Prepare the launch sequence. I need the detonation exactly 18 seconds after the vehicle stops moving. That allows for the shift change personnel to congregate. I looked at the clock. 04 Rassars local time. The darkest hour. Anya stood beside me, her presence a solid anchor in the swirling chaos. She didn't speak, just watched the clock with the same terrifying focus I had. 5 seconds to launch, Varroc reported. I inserted the interface spike into the signal booster. My fingers flew across the holographic keyboard, prepping the phantom code. This was the moment of truth. If the timing was off by even a second, the K'tharr would correlate the physical attack with the digital insertion point, and the Maya would be doomed. Kinetic launched. Detonation in 3, 2, 1. I hit the execute command on the digital ghost. For a terrifying, endless moment, nothing happened. Then, 3 kilometers away, a column of blinding white-blue light erupted near the base of the K'tharr spire. The sound arrived a second later, a deep, resonant thoom that rattled the ferro-concrete of the bunker. The explosion wasn't big enough to destroy the spire, but it was massive enough to look like a fusion core breach. Instantly, the K'tharr comms erupted into a storm of panicked, high-priority chatter. I could hear the officers screaming about thermal signatures, structural damage, and unauthorized energy releases. The digital ghost, my phantom breach, was already inside the planetary governance data core. I brought up the K'tharr network status. The firewalls were screaming, not about the explosion, but about the massive, fictional data siphon occurring within their most protected servers. Anya, look, I whispered, pointing to the network display. The K'tharr security protocols, rigid and bureaucratic, immediately prioritized the data breach over the physical damage. They assumed the explosion was a diversion for the real threat, the loss of their vital intelligence. All non-essential personnel relocate to Spire internal defense positions, secure the data core, prioritize digital lockdown. The command roared over the intercepted frequency. I had done it. They were pulling patrols from the mire, sealing off sectors, and focusing all their adaptive olfactory sensors on the physical blast site, searching for thermal residue and biosignatures. They were looking for a physical enemy, while the real enemy, the ghost, was already inside their mind. Anya placed a hand on my good shoulder. The metallic taste of victory was sweet and addictive. "You have bought us 3 weeks, Kael," she said, her voice filled with a rare, profound admiration. 3 weeks of reduced patrols. We can repair the generators. We can gather more resources. I turned to her, exhaustion finally hitting me like a physical blow. 3 weeks is a start. She held my gaze, her eyes shining with the reflected light of the console. It is more than a start. It is a miracle. She leaned in, and I thought, for one devastating, hopeful second, that she was going to kiss me. Instead, she pressed her forehead gently against mine, a gesture of deep, Zelosian respect and solidarity. The dry spice of her scent filled my senses. "You are a dangerous man, Kael," she murmured, her breath warm against my skin. "The most dangerous weapon the Maya possesses. Now, sleep. You earned it." I watched her walk away, the adrenaline draining out of me, leaving behind only the profound ache of my shoulder and the heavy knowledge that I had just signed my own death warrant. I had given the K'tharr a reason to fear humanity, and that fear would eventually lead them straight back to the ghost. But for now, the Maya was safe, and for 3 weeks, I was her indispensable right hand. That was enough. That was everything. The 3 weeks that followed were the most intense of my life. The Maya was safe, breathing for the first time in years. We used the reprieve exactly as planned, reinforcing the shield generators with the 8 precious cylinders, relocating critical supply caches, and, most importantly, preparing for the inevitable K'tharr countermove. I didn't sleep much. I was tethered to the console, constantly monitoring the K'tharr network. The digital ghost was still running, a self-sustaining loop of garbage data that kept their internal security apparatus paralyzed. But I knew its shelf life was limited. Tyrants are slow, but they are not stupid. Eventually, they would realize the phantom breach was just noise. Anya and I were inseparable during those weeks, bound by the shared burden of survival. She was the commander, I was the architect. We worked side by side, the air thick with the dry spice of her presence and the metallic tang of my own fear. She never mentioned my mandated departure again, but I saw it in her eyes, a calculated distance, a preparation for severance. She was building a future for the Maya, and I was not in the long-term plan. My plasma wound healed quickly, leaving a slick, angry scar on my shoulder. a permanent reminder of the price of the last victory. On the 21st day, the silence broke. It wasn't a blaring alert or a distant explosion. It was a precise, chilling shift in the K'tharr comms. The frantic chatter about data loss ceased. It was replaced by cold, professional coordination. Target confirmed. Source of anomalous coding traced to Sector 47 Beta. High probability of human origin. Prepare surgical strike. They had done it. They realized the ghost was a decoy, and they had traced the signature of the coder, the pattern of human ingenuity, back to the Maya's central signal hub. They weren't coming for fuel or for territory. They were coming for me. "Anya," I said, my voice cutting through the sudden stillness of the bunker. I brought up the external sensor feeds. Heavy siege armor. 3 platoons. They are moving directly toward the old purification tunnels. She looked at the screen, her face utterly devoid of surprise. She had known this moment was coming. "Varrock, mobilize the extraction teams. Activate the primary shield generator now," Anya roared, her voice regaining its full, resonant power. The bunker immediately descended into organized chaos. Xylosian fighters grabbed their gear. The deep thrum of the newly powered shields vibrated through the floor. Anya turned to me, her eyes burning with fierce resolve. "Kael, you know the secondary escape route. It leads 3 levels down, into the abandoned maintenance grid. You must take the new shield codes and the master encryption key. The Maya cannot survive if the K'tharr capture that data." She was handing me the future of the Maya. It was the highest honor and the clearest confirmation that she viewed me as a tool, a necessary container of vital information, not a man she loved. "I won't leave you here," I said, gripping the console. "This is not a negotiation, Kael," she hissed, grabbing my arm, her claws digging slightly into the flesh. "This is an order. Your life is now the strategic asset. If they capture you, they capture the key to all our systems. Go, now!" The sound of massive, rhythmic impacts echoed from the tunnel entrance. The K'tharr siege armor was breaching the first reinforced door. We had maybe 4 minutes before they were inside the main hub. Varrock rushed in, his face grim. "We can hold the main choke point for 3 minutes, Anya. No longer." "Go, Kael," Anya commanded Varrock. "Lead the defense. I will secure the humans' extraction." Varrock hesitated, looking at me, then at Anya, and finally obeyed. He vanished into the depths of the tunnel network. Anya grabbed the small, heavily armored data drive containing the new codes and pressed it into my hand. "You will leave Tyrus VII," she stated, her voice tight with finality. "You will find a place to hide this data. You will survive." I looked at the drive, then at her magnificent, terrifying face. I saw the exhaustion, the responsibility, the impossible weight of command. I realized that if I left now, I would survive. But she would be trapped here, fighting a war she couldn't win without the strategic advantage I provided. And if she died, my survival would be meaningless. I finally understood my last, best move. The ultimate sacrifice that wasn't just physical but strategic. "Anya," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the internal storm. "If they breach this room, they will capture the command center. They will capture you." "I have contingency plans," she snapped, pushing me toward the secondary hatch. "Not good enough," I countered. "They know how my mind works. They will interrogate you, analyze the patterns, and find every contingency. The Maya will fall in 6 months. I have to make sure that doesn't happen." The K'tharr were through the second door. The air vibrated with the heavy thud of their steps. Closer now, terrifyingly real. I pulled the data drive from my pocket and slammed it back onto the central command console. I quickly rerouted the Maya's main comms array, the massive signal booster we used for the digital ghost, and integrated the feedback loop of my neural disruptor chip. Anya watched, horrified, as she realized what I was doing. "Kael, stop!" she cried, lunging for the console. "No, Anya, this is my last strategy," I said, my heart pounding a frantic drum against my ribs. I grabbed her shoulders, holding her back. The K'tharr are looking for the source of the ingenuity. I am going to give them a source they can never exploit. I looked into her amethyst eyes, letting go of all the masks, all the calculation, all the fear. This was the end. The impossible love was finally, brutally real. When I trigger this, the neural disruptor will not just fry my memory and nervous system, I explained quickly, forcing the words out. The resulting energy spike will overload this entire comms array, sending a massive, encrypted, untraceable data burst into the K'tharr central network. It won't be a phantom breach this time. It will be pure, volatile, destructive garbage data, a digital supernova. The K'tharr were at the final door, plasma fire melting the ferroconcrete. They will think I have successfully executed a final, catastrophic data theft, I continued, my voice rising above the grinding metal. They will panic. They will prioritize saving their data core over capturing the Maya leadership. It will buy you months, enough time to rebuild, to move to the surface and to win the war you started. Her face was a mask of agonizing realization. She knew I was right. It was the only way to guarantee the survival of her revolution. Kael, no, the cost is irrelevant if the purpose survives, I whispered, using her own words against her. I reached up and gently touched the scar on my shoulder. This is what I was meant for. Anya. This is my purpose. I felt the immense, terrifying surge of pure emotion. The impossible love that had driven me for 4 years finally break through the tactical shell I had built. I love you, Anya. I always have. It was the first and last time I would ever say it. She didn't try to stop me again. She didn't offer empty promises. She simply closed the distance between us, her strong, chitinous arms wrapping around me in a crushing embrace. She pressed her mouth fiercely against mine, a kiss of ozone, spice, and desperation. It was a kiss of farewell, of recognition, of impossible acceptance. It was everything I had ever wanted, realized in the dying seconds of my life. The final door buckled inward with a catastrophic roar. Heavy siege armor poured into the room, their massive weapons turning toward the console. Anya pulled back, her eyes shining with unshed tears, a devastating mix of grief and command. "Go! I will hold them!" I didn't argue. I didn't need to. I hit the trigger command on the console, sending the final activation signal to the disruptor chip behind my ear. The pain was instantaneous, searing, absolute. It felt like every nerve ending in my body was simultaneously set ablaze, followed by an immediate, terrifying void. But before the darkness took me, I saw the console explode in a blinding cascade of sparks, the comms array screaming as it pushed the final, fatal ghost into the K'tharr network. I heard the K'tharr officers recoil, their screams changing from triumph to confusion and panic. Massive data surge, data core breach, abort capture, prioritize defense. I collapsed, the heavy data drive slipping from my numb fingers. My final, coherent thought was of Anya, her face illuminated by the dying sparks of the console, already turning to face the enemy, already using the chaos I had created. Humanity. Fuck yeah. We win by bleeding. They say the Maya survived the winter. They say the K'tharr High Command was paralyzed for months, convinced that the human they called the Ghost had executed a final devastating digital attack, crippling their systems beyond repair. They pulled back, focusing all their resources on internal defense and trying to undo the damage of the digital supernova. The Maya had its time to breathe, to rebuild, to grow strong. Anya never left Tyrus VII. She used the time I bought her to consolidate power, to unite the scattered lower sectors, and to turn the Maya into a true fortress. I never saw her again, of course, but sometimes, when the surviving fighters talk about the war, they speak of the scar, Not the plasma scar on my shoulder, but the one I left on the K'tharr network. They say that even years later, the K'tharr security protocols still operate under the assumption that a rogue human presence is constantly lurking in their firewalls, ready to strike. They say they never truly recovered from the final massive data hemorrhage. Anya won her war eventually. She drove the Dragon Tyrants off Tyrus VII, not with brute strength, but with calculated ingenuity, discipline, and the willingness to pay the ultimate price. She never forgot the cost, either. The central command hub of the rebuilt Maya is not a grand fortress or a shining spire. It's still in the purification tunnels, and it holds one monument, a simple, unadorned console, scorched and inert, left exactly where it died. And I know, wherever she is, the Xylosian queen of the Maya remembers the human boy who loved her, the one who broke every rule of survival, who turned an impossible love into a fatal strategy, and who, in his final, conscious act, became the ghost that saved them all.